When I heard the front door creak open and a woman's voice chirp, "We're home," I thought my dad had brought back takeout. Instead, he brought a stranger who was already calling the house hers, and then she asked me to leave like I was a guest overstaying my welcome. I'm 17. I've lived with my dad full-time ever since my mom passed away 3 years ago from cancer. Those years haven't been easy. I was 14 when she died and my world just kind of stopped. My dad, to be fair, tried. But he also coped in his own messy way, burying himself in work, slowly disconnecting, and eventually diving headfirst into online dating like it was his job. I'd see her name Claire pop up on his phone, hear her voice on speaker calls, even overhear the occasional baby talk, while I tried to do my math homework in the next room. But I never imagined he'd actually marry her before even meeting her in person. Yes, you read that right. They got married online. They Skyped their vows with some sketchy officiant from one of those international love services, and he didn't even tell me until 2 days after it happened. "She's gonna come visit soon," he said over dinner one night, stabbing at his overcooked steak with way more force than necessary. "It'll be good for the house to have a woman around again." I choked on my mashed potatoes. "You mean like a vacation?" He cleared his throat. "No. Like to stay." 3 days later, Claire arrived. 2 oversized pink suitcases, stilettos at 9 a.m., and a perfume cloud that hit you 5 feet before she did. And in the time it took for her to step over the welcome mat, she had claimed the master bedroom, lit an aromatherapy candle that reeked of synthetic lavender, and declared that the living room furniture had to go because it didn't reflect her energy. And then she turned to me. With her fake French manicure resting on her hip, she smiled and said, "Sweetie, you'll need to start packing. Your room's going to be my yoga space." I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. I looked at my dad. He was staring at his shoes. That's when I realized wasn't going to stop her. This woman, who had been in our house for 11 minutes, was kicking me out of my room, and my father, the man who once held my hair when I threw up after my first heartbreak, who sat through every school play, I realized he had already chosen her. "I don't have anywhere else to go," I said. She blinked. "Don't you have like a grandmother or something?" "She has Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember who I am." Clara frowned. "Well, maybe she'll think you're a visiting angel. You know, like therapy or whatever." I locked myself in my room that night, stared at the posters on my walls, the glow-in-the-dark stars I never peeled off the ceiling, and realized my time Harimi home was about to be erased. I called my best friend Lucy, bawling. She offered her couch. Her parents were saints. But I wanted to belong somewhere, not just crash like a stray. The next day the twist came. A man in a blue jumpsuit knocked on our door with a clipboard. He said he was with child services. Clara had called them to report an unstable minor with anger issues who might pose a threat. Let that sink in. She called CPS on me. The social worker took one look at me still in my pajamas, red-eyed, clutching a cup of cold tea, and asked to speak to my dad. Clara, meanwhile, flounced into the kitchen and began juicing a cucumber like this was just another Tuesday. I overheard her say something like, "The energy in this house is very hostile." She slammed a door. Yeah, I did. Once. Because someone tried to exile me from my life. When the CPS guy came back out, he looked tired. Not annoyed, not angry. Just deeply, deeply tired. "This seems more like a domestic disagreement than a child protection issue," he said, making notes. "But I would advise this household finds a better living arrangement." That was his nice way of saying, "You people are a mess and I feel sorry for this girl." My dad barely said a word. I packed a bag. That night, Lucy and I sat on her roof eating Oreos dipped in peanut butter and talking about how sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the first ones to throw you under the bus. But here's the thing, Clara didn't win. Not really. Because a week later, after she rearranged the furniture, replaced all our framed family photos with crystal pyramids, and set fire to the microwave trying to energy cleanse it with sage, my dad called me. He asked if I wanted to come home. I laughed. I asked if she was still there. He sighed. No. She left. Said she didn't feel spiritually aligned with suburbia. Of course she didn't. There's a lot more to this story, including a surprise appearance by Clara's ex-husband, who emailed me screenshots of their past projects. Hint, she's done this before. But I'll save that for the second half. Right now, I'm just trying to rebuild the pieces of home. Not just the walls, but trust, safety, memory. And yeah, maybe I'm still mad. Maybe I'll always be a little mad. But I'm also proud. Because even when no one else stood up for me did, I didn't go back. Even though she was gone, even though the microwave had supposedly been saged and replaced, even though my dad sounded like he'd aged 10 years in the 1 week she'd been in the house, I didn't go back. Not yet. Because the thing is, sometimes when someone shows you that they'll choose someone else over you without blinking, even if they regret it later, that betrayal doesn't just disappear because they change their mind. It lingers. It rots. He started calling more. Leaving voicemails. Long, rambling ones that started with, "Hey, kiddo," and ended with, "I really messed up." Sometimes he'd try to make jokes. Sometimes I could hear his voice shake. But every time I listened to them, I just felt hollow. Lucy's mom, God bless her, made me hot chocolate every night. And she didn't ask questions, not right away. Until one day, she just quietly sat next to me on the couch and said, "I don't think he stopped loving you. I just think he forgot how to show it." That's when I started crying again. Because I didn't want to hate him. I wanted to believe that maybe he'd been tricked, maybe manipulated, maybe just desperate for love after being lonely for so long. But then I remembered how he looked at his shoes while that woman told me to pack. He didn't even look at me. The twist came about 10 days later in the form of an email with the subject line, "You deserve to know who she is." It was from a man named Leonard M. At first I thought it was spam. But the first line of the email was, "I was married to Clara for 4 years. I read your Reddit post. And I've been where you are." Yeah, I posted on Reddit. I didn't name names, didn't even mention my state, but apparently, Clara's pattern had left a trail long enough for someone else to spot. Leonard's email was long, thoughtful, but also horrifying. He talked about how Clara had a cycle, a method. She would find lonely, middle-aged men, usually widowed through international dating services, flatter them, love-bomb them, and then insert herself into their lives with speed and intensity. And then she'd start isolating them, pushing out family, rewriting histories, convincing them that she was their salvation and that everyone else was low vibration. With Leonard, she'd moved in, maxed out 2 credit cards, and convinced him to invest in her spiritual jewelry brand, which turned out to be just repackaged AliExpress beads she sold on Etsy. She left after 8 months, taking his dog, his car, and the one good leather couch. "I thought I was the only fool," Leonard wrote, "until I found your post." He attached screenshots, photos of her, messages, a scanned copy of their marriage license, even a video from a Ring camera where she was screaming at his teenage daughter about negative feminine energy. It made me sick. And it made everything make sense. I sent the email to my dad. He didn't respond right away. But 2 days later, he showed up outside Lucy's house. He didn't knock. He just stood at the curb with a manila folder in his hand and his eyes red-rimmed. Lucy's mom looked out the window and asked gently, "Want me to handle him?" I shook my head. When I opened the door, he held up the folder. Annulment papers. "I filed them yesterday." His voice cracked. "You were right. About everything. Tu just didn't want to be alone." I crossed my arms. "So you picked someone who made me feel invisible?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time in weeks. "I didn't pick her," he said quietly. "I abandoned you. And I will regret that for the rest of my life." We talked. For hours. On the porch steps. I told him everything. About Clara. About the fear. About CPS. About how I couldn't sleep for days because I thought she'd show up in the night and burn my photos or move my furniture. He cried. I cried. We sat in silence for a long time. Then, like some tragic punchline, my phone buzzed. It was a private number. I answered. "Hello." It was Clara. She was sobbing, ranting, talking about how she was spiritually wounded, and how my dad had betrayed a soul pact, and how I had poisoned his vibration with ancestral karma. I hung up. He looked at me. "What did she say?" "She wants a refund," I said flatly. "On your soul." We both laughed. For the first time in weeks. And that laughter, it didn't fix everything, but it was the first brick laid on the road back. The next week I came home. The house smelled different. Cleaner. Sadder maybe, but honest. He'd taken down the tapestries. Put the couch back in place. My room was untouched. He had even bought me a new comforter, trying to match the one I had as a kid, white with little constellations. He said, "I couldn't find the exact one. But this one felt close. I stood in the doorway and stared at it for a long time. And then I asked him, "Why didn't you stop her?" He sighed. "I was afraid that if I pushed back she'd leave. And I didn't want to be alone again." "But you weren't alone," I said. "You had me." "I forgot that," he whispered. "And I'm so sorry." Coming home felt like walking into a familiar song that had been remixed without permission. Everything looked almost the same but off. The living room no longer had Clara's bizarre velvet drapes, but there was a faint outline on the wall where one of her massive chakra posters had hung. My dad had cleared the weird crystals from the kitchen windowsill, but the faint scent of incense still lingered in the air like a ghost too stubborn to leave. I dropped my backpack in the hallway and stood in the middle of the house. My dad hovered a few feet behind me, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome in his own redemption arc. "You don't have to stay if you're not ready," he said quietly. "But I want you to know it's yours. It's your home again." I turned and looked at him. Really looked. His face was thinner, like guilt had hollowed him out. There were deep lines under his eyes. She hadn't been sleeping either. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was real. And I needed real. "I'll stay," I said. "But I'm not pretending nothing happened." He nodded. "Fair." The days after that were a strange kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind. More like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the next wave. We didn't talk about Clara much. Every now and then her name would slip in a returned package, a missed call from an unknown number. My dad started seeing a therapist. So did I. It helped. But the real twist, the one no one saw coming, arrived with a knock at the door 3 weeks later. I opened it, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery. But instead I saw a teenage girl, maybe 16, skinny, pale and shaking, with a backpack hanging off one shoulder like it was filled with bricks. "Are you Annabelle?" she asked, voice cracking. I blinked. "Yeah. Who are you?" "I'm Clara's daughter." My world tilted. She introduced herself as Isla. I invited her in before I even had time to think. My dad wasn't home, thank God, because the second she sat on our couch, she started crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She wasn't just Clara's daughter. She was her victim. She told me everything. Clara had abandoned her years ago, left her with her biological dad, and only showed up once every couple of years, always with a new man, new wardrobe, new spiritual identity. Last time she called herself Starflame and said she was allergic to polyester and capitalism, Isla said, wiping her nose on her sleeve. The week Clara moved in with us, she had told Isla she was going to start fresh with her new soul family. When Isla tried to call her, Clara blocked her. "I Googled you," she said. "I found the Reddit thread. I knew it was you. And her. I didn't know where else to go." We sat for hours. Talking. Drinking tea. She showed me texts from Clara, ones that were all light and love and vague threats disguised as affirmations. "Sometimes people have to be cut off so they can grow," one read. "You're heavy energy right now, Isla. I can't let you drain me anymore." This woman had treated both of us like emotional trash bags she could toss out when we stopped serving her narrative. When my dad came home, he froze in the doorway. He knew. Instantly. Her face had the same bone structure. The same dark eyes. She looked like Clara, if Clara had ever been vulnerable enough to bleed. We told him everything. To his credit, he didn't argue. Didn't deny. He just sat there, stunned. Then he looked at Isla and asked, "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" She shook her head. "My dad's in rehab again. I was couch surfing. But they didn't want me back." He nodded once. "Then you can stay here. For now. As long as you need." That night we sat around the kitchen table eating frozen lasagna and talking like 3 war survivors trying to piece together the same battlefield from different angles. Isla was smart. Sarcastic. Sharp-edged in the way only someone who's been betrayed too many times can be. And somehow her presence filled a hole I didn't know I had. She got it. In a way no one else could. It wasn't long before she officially moved in. My dad set up the guest room. She enrolled at my school. Lucy adored her. We never called each other sisters. But sometimes I'd catch her humming under her breath in the hallway or folding my laundry just because she felt like it. And I'd realize we're becoming something close. And just when we thought Clara was finally gone for good, she made one last appearance. She showed up. At our house. In person. It was a Sunday morning. My dad was in the garage, Isla and I were making pancakes, and the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there she was. Clara. In a long flowing robe, sunglasses that covered half her face, and a suitcase at her feet like she'd walked out of a plane from a cult retreat. "I've come to realign the energy of this space," she said without blinking. "It's in trauma." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Behind me, I heard Isla's sharp inhale. My dad stepped out from the garage with a wrench in one hand and the fury of a man who had finally woken up in the other. "You need to leave," he said. Clara blinked. "This is still legally my home." "No," he said, pulling out a folded paper from his back pocket. "It's not. Annulment's final. You're trespassing." She looked at Isla. "Baby, tell them. You want to come with me, right?" Isla stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "I don't want anything to do with you." Clara stood there for a long time. And then slowly her shoulders dropped. She turned, picked up her suitcase, and walked away without another word. I watched her go. The woman who had wrecked so much in such little time. She didn't look back once. And that was the last time we saw her. That night, Isla and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot chocolate. "You think she'll try again?" I asked. "She always tries again," Isla said. "But I'm not scared anymore. Not with you guys." I leaned my head on her shoulder. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. We'd been through fire. But we were still standing. The months that followed were like relearning how to live inside your own skin. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd laugh like I was 17 again, full of stupid joy over nothing milkshakes, a good meme, a perfectly timed eye roll from Isla. Other days I'd wake up with dread knotted so tight in my stomach that brushing my teeth felt like a mountain. Therapy helped. So did Isla. So did the quiet moments with my dad, when we didn't talk about her but sat together anyway watching reruns of old sitcoms, sharing takeout, or fixing up the garage like it was some sacred project of atonement. He never pushed me to forgive. Never demanded trust back like it was owed. He just showed up. Every day. That was more than I ever expected. And slowly it began to matter. One night, maybe 6 months after Clara's final exit, my dad knocked on my door with something in his hand. A small box carefully wrapped. "I was gonna wait until graduation," he said. "But you've earned this 1,000 times over." Inside was a necklace. A simple 1 silver chain. A tiny star pendant with a birthstone in the middle. "It's from your mom," he said softly. "She picked it out for you before she passed." I found it while clearing out the attic. I think I forgot it was there. Or maybe I couldn't face it. My throat tightened. She died when I was 10. I didn't remember much, just warm hands, soft lullabies, and the scent of her shampoo. But seeing that necklace, it was like a hug through time. He looked nervous. "I know I can't fix what happened with Clara. But I'm trying, Annabelle. I'm not perfect. I'm still working on my own damage. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you." I reached forward, touched the necklace. And for the first time in over a year, I let him hug me without flinching. It wasn't a miracle moment. But it was real. And I chose to let it in. Meanwhile, Isla started to bloom. She got into art. Real art. Not the manifest your genius kind Clara used to fake. But messy, beautiful sketches, raw and layered. She'd stay up late, blasting music, covered in charcoal and ink, completely in her own world. I'd peek in sometimes and see her smiling to herself, and it filled me with this strange, quiet pride. She became part of our rhythm. She helped my dad cook. She and Lucy built an Instagram baking account that somehow went mildly viral. People started calling us sisters even though we never labeled it ourselves. And weirdly it felt right. At school, people asked what happened to Clara. We told them the truth, but the sanitized version. She wasn't who we thought she was. And that was enough. The full truth stayed between us. Some stories don't need an audience. They need time. Until one day a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just one word on the front. Isla. She opened it at the kitchen table. My dad stood behind her, arms crossed like a guard dog. Inside were 3 sheets of lavender-scented paper. Clara's handwriting. Her usual dramatic loops and meaningless metaphors. Started with, I forgive you for abandoning our spiritual journey. It ended with, you'll come back when you're ready. Blood and soul can't be severed by illusion. Isla didn't flinch. Didn't even finish reading it. She just folded the letter once, walked over to the toaster, and calmly slid it in. We all stared. The paper curled, caught fire, and turned to ash in seconds. Mom, she said deadpan. You were always full of hot air anyway. We laughed until we cried. From that day on, we stopped fearing Clara's return. She was a storm that passed through, tore everything apart, and left us standing. Not untouched, but stronger. One evening, Lucy asked me, do you ever think you'd want to see her again? Like, to get closure? I thought about that. Really thought. And I realized Clara never gave closure. She created chaos, disappeared, and waited for people to come crawling back so she could play savior again. I didn't want that. I didn't want anything more from her. My closure was Isla. My dad trying. Me choosing to stay. We ended that year stronger than I ever imagined. Graduation came. Isla screamed louder than anyone when I walked across the stage. My dad cried. So did Lucy. Her mom even baked cupcakes with our faces on them. They were hideous. Imperfect. Isla got accepted into a visual arts program in the city. My dad helped her shop for supplies like he'd been waiting his whole life to buy art pens. When she left for school that fall, we threw her a goodbye dinner that ended in karaoke and tears, and way too much sparkling cider. That night, she hugged me tighter than she ever had. You saved me, she whispered. No, I said. We saved each other. Years passed. I moved out, got my own apartment, started working with a nonprofit for kids in transitional homes. Funny how the worst year of your life can end up steering you toward your calling. My dad retired early and started volunteering with foster youth programs. We weren't perfect, but we were honest. We were whole. Sometimes Isla would come home for the weekend and we'd sit around the table, reminiscing about the great chakra takeover of 2025. She tried to stage the microwave, Isla would say, like it had past life trauma. She called my therapy books shame scrolls, my dad added. She made me sleep on the floor because my teenage aura was incompatible with her rest state, I chimed in. We'd all laugh, but underneath the humor was something deeper. A kind of peace that only comes from surviving someone who tried to rewrite your story and winning it back. So Aite? Was I the asshole for refusing to leave when my dad's new wife told me to pack my bags? No. I was a kid fighting for my home, for my voice, for my place. And now? Now I'm more than just not the asshole. I'm the author of my own story. And I'm finally writing it on my terms.